On today's episode of Editing Humanity, we're diving into a rapid fire conversation with Professor Egbert Schwartz, all about the ethical implications of CRISPR gene editing. This episode is packed with thought provoking questions, honest answers, and meaningful reflection. It's not just about science, it's about responsibility, ethics, and the choices we make with powerful new tools. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of Editing Humanity, where we will be talking about the ethical implications of CRISPR. Today, I'm excited to welcome Professor Egbert Schwartz, a distinguished professor at Northern Arizona University who has studied and taught the foundations behind CRISPR technology. While Professor Schwartz isn't directly involved in laboratory work, his deep understanding of the science behind CRISPR gives him a unique and insightful perspective on its potential. Today, we're diving into not just the mechanics of CRISPR, but also the critical bioethical questions surrounding gene editing as CRISPR technology advances. It raises profound issues about the limits of human intervention in genetics, the potential for genetic modification, and the long-term consequences for society. Join us for an engaging discussion on the science and ethics of CRISPR as we explore the possibilities and the responsibility that comes with this groundbreaking technology. Again, welcome, Professor Schwartz.
Thank you.
All right. So I grouped our discussion into a few key areas. We're going to start with the risks and responsibilities of using this technology,
Okay.
and followed by the questions around accessibility and fairness. And finally, the long-term societal implications of gene editing. So starting with our first question, how can we reduce the risk of unintended genetic changes when using CRISPR to edit genes? And also, what are the risks when using CRISPR?
Wow, that's a complicated question. How can we reduce the risk? Well, by not releasing genetically modified organism at a very large scale before we've carefully tested what the consequence of such a release would be. I think many of the applications of CRISPR involve medicines or laboratory settings in vitro. And so I think the chances there of things getting out of control are much smaller. It is kind of, things cha are changing very fast, I think, in molecular biology. And sometimes it seems the policy, et cetera, is trying to play catch up with what is possible.
Got you. And then, is there any risks when using CRISPR?
Well, CRISPR is a technology, a very powerful technology for editing the genomes of pretty much all organisms. So it's a very effective and efficient system. And so that by itself can be good. It can be used to cure diseases. It can be used to improve agricultural yields, et cetera, help with bioremediation. Um, but it is, of course, also possible to perhaps use it in more damaging ways or unintended consequences.
Got you. And what could be those changes?
The unintended consequences, I don't know. I mean, people debate a lot about that. So we have been genetically engineering organisms for a while and have been using genetically engineered crops, agricultural crops, for quite a long time here in the United States. There certainly have been vigorous debates how those crops affected things such as monarch butterfly populations. I don't know. Is it in your top 10 at the moment, the number of genetically engineered plants that are out there, or do you have other worries? It seems like,
I think there's definitely a lot of like different types of worries when it comes to this because I feel like it can go for a lot of things, not just food or organisms. It could also go for like traits, like physical abilities, or like some
yes,
people can maybe weaponize it too. So it's definitely a little worrisome.
yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, then we should probably shoot into our next question.
Okay.
Should CRISPR only be used to treat diseases, or is it acceptable to use it for enhancing traits like intelligence or physical abilities?
Yeah, I mean, so what you're talking about is doing in vitro fertilization, generating a bunch of embryos, and then genetically engineering one of those embryos to enhance the human traits. At the moment, that is not legal and is frowned upon, because we don't want to genetically engineer human beings. But so that means that the entire human is genetically modified, all of the cells, as opposed to a situation where CRISPR might be used for treating a disease, such as, say, cancer or something like that. And the CRISPR technology would focus on the tumor cells or the cancerous cells and not the entire body. And so it seems people are pushing the envelope as far as that stuff goes. I think there's already quite a bit of screening of embryos going on, and then people are picking the embryo that they think is best suited.
Hmm.
Um, and so are we at a frontier where people are going to start trying to genetically engineer humans for improved performance? I think we're still quite a ways off for that.
Got you. Got you. So now it's kind of limited to that where it's just it's I feel like it's frowned upon too. You just brought up where it's not just trying to like go off of the like more broad term kind of be like designer babies, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like yeah, I agree. I think it should be only be used to prevent diseases or like
Mhm.
sickle cell anemia or genetic disorders like that.
Yes.
Kind of do the most good in people's lives. I also had a question too. When it comes to traits like intelligence or physical appearance, what like specific genes can influence them? Or like, is there
Uh,
any specific genes for intelligence or for looks?
so I think that one of the challenges with what you're talking about is that it is not very simple to genetically engineer a human being for improved performance. Many of the traits that you're talking about are polygenetic traits, which means that many genes are influencing that trait.
Got
Um,
you.
and it is much more difficult to bring many genes, insert many new genes into a genome than just one or two genes, or just focus on a single gene or a single protein. And so I think we're very far away from engineering humans with polygenetic traits.
Got you. Do you think that could come in the near future though?
I don't think in the near future, no.
No.
No, I think we're going to be much more focused on, there's lots of single gene diseases out there that that we could perhaps treat. I think that's going to be much more of a focus.
I agree. I feel like for this whole scientific innovation, it's definitely going to be kind of mainly focused on the treating aspect or the medical aspect rather than just like personal, maybe physical altercation aspect of it, which I do think it could be clouded in a lot of debates with it, just because it is a little daunting when it comes to these conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so then we can go into our third question. What are the potential dangers of genetically edited organisms being released into the environment? This can be an example of like insects or plants. Do you think that can ruin the balance of the ecosystems?
Um, well, so I mean, we were talking about that a little bit before already, I think, when we talked about genetically engineered crops. That's a very large
Hmm.
scale release of genetically engineered organisms into the environment. Um, yeah, release of genetically engineered insects, I think, is very uncommon, but one can imagine that things could go wrong. Of course, a lot of things are going wrong in the environment already. Things are changing extremely fast, so um, it's really hard to predict. If you make a mistake when there's a very large scale release of genetic organisms, I think. The other thing that people also talk about is, and you talked about weaponization of this technology,
Hmm.
but genetically engineered of harmful pathogens and them getting released is of course also problematic. But I don't know if CRISPR really is revolutionizing that. There were already technologies for doing that before CRISPR. What's really special about CRISPR, I feel, is that it can so efficiently edit the genomes of eukaryotic organisms, such as
Hmm. And what are those technologies that can create those kind of widespread pathogens or edit those types of stuff?
um, well, so even with older technology developed in the 70s and the 80s, using enzymes, it was possible to cut the DNA and start moving pieces of DNA around, thereby, seeing how the pathogen would change, would it become more virulent or not, etc. And there certainly has been research on that already, and I don't feel CRISPR revolutionized that research.
Gotcha. Another question I do have too is how do we address the risk of long-term consequences or side effects of gene editing in humans?
I don't know. I think that if gene editing in humans starts, I imagine it's going to be a very small group of people.
Gotcha. So kind of like a small study
That
group.
Well, a small study group maybe, or even if it becomes commercialized, and um, I still think it's going to be a relatively small fraction of people that will do it because it's very expensive, I imagine. Um, so I don't know how widespread it will.
So, so you're okay. So you don't
And
think it's
so
probably
then
gonna
when
be
it
too
comes
widespread.
to addressing the negative consequences, I don't know if it's going to be a huge problem.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think you have like a more hopeful kind of look to it, or a more like feeling that it's going to be a more positive aspect to our society rather than it could be a negative?
Well, I mean that depends a lot on the people that run the countries, right? The politicians, the government officials, etc. But yes, I think it's actually going to be very important for treatment of diseases, both genetic diseases as well as diseases like cancer. And so I think on balance, it's going to be positive. Yes.
Got you. No, I agree. I feel like hope. I feel like most people want to have a hopeful or a positive outlook when it comes to this because if you don't, it's kind of scary.
Well, yeah.
Um, yeah.
But but
Uh,
uh but at the same time, I think it's important to keep track of everything and keep studying it and all of that stuff.
mhm. This
We
actually
need to
kind of.
continue to have these conversations, I think.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I think it's very important for us to have these conversations just to talk about how important these things could be because it could alter our future as it is,
Yeah.
you know. There's also your question about governments too. I do have a question about that too. What should be the role of governments in regulating CRISPR technology to ensure it's used ethically?
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult role for the government to be in because they don't know what's going to happen, right? It's hard to predict the future. Um, so when genetic engineering first happened in the 1970s, there were lots of meetings and laws were drafted up because people were afraid of genetically engineered organisms. I think a lot of that fear has not borne out, really. There haven't been huge crises up to date since the 70s. Um, from genetically engineered organisms that I can think of. Um, and so maybe they will overcorrect the other way around and let the technology run wild. I don't know, but I think government has to be careful. It doesn't want to stifle innovation, and at the same time doesn't want the population to be at risk.
Yes. No, I agree with you. I feel like, do you feel they're going to be in a more, well, I feel like, do you think they're going to be in a more ethical, like a more understanding of this? Because there's probably going to be a lot of more, whether it be scientists talking about this or research about it and so much practices about it before we can ever like introduce it to people.
Um, well, I mean, I think CRISPR is being used on people already
Gotcha.
in the treatment of diseases
Yes.
in like select groups. So that's going to continue for treatment of diseases, I'm sure.
But do you think it could become more widespread? So, like, do we feel like it could be spread to like different countries? Is accessible to like everywhere in like poor countries. So people who
No, I think that's a very difficult situation because CRISPR technology would not be in the top 10, I think, if you want to deliver new medicines to poor and developing countries.
got you,
I think CRISPR technology is very expensive, and I think there would be great inequality between countries, but also within a country, I imagine
got you.
that the wealthier people are more likely to have access to CRISPR technology than poor people.
And then do you think there would be a divide between that, between rich and poor countries?
Yeah, I mean, yes, as far as treatment of disease goes,
Hmm.
imagine treatment of certain cancers. Yeah, it can be treated successfully in the United States, but it's not possible in Ghana or something like that. Yeah, I think that's very possible. And I think we already have those kind of medical inequities in place with other processes and technologies.
Do you know what those are?
Oh, I just antibiotic availability, chemotherapy, the list goes on. I think, types of surgery, etc.
Gotcha. Very nice. Let's see. I think the next question should be then asking, should there be ethical limits on how far we go for modifying the human genome, especially like I guess we already mostly talked about how it needs to be more for diseases rather than human capabilities. But in this worldview, if there is where they have that available, do you think there should be a limit?
Personally, yeah, definitely.
What would be the limit?
I mean, I think I mean it's of course it's a compromise between an individual's freedom to choose what they want to do with it for their offspring. They want to genetically enhance the embryos that they have made through IVF. But I think once you start going for things like looks and stuff like that, I don't me personally, I'm not a big fan of those kind of ideas.
No, I agree too. I think that can also be used in in such like a weird way. If anything, I feel like there's always going to be like a weird hierarchy or something
Yeah.
more like a means to discriminate, which I think is a little weird. I also have a question towards that too. Should what's it called? Could the widespread of CRISPR for genetic modifications reduce genetic diversity? And is that something we should be concerned about?
I think we're losing massive genetic diversity at the moment but it's not because of CRISPR. And
Was it because?
it'll be because of CRISPR. Well, climate change, just the environmental changes that are happening out there at the moment. I think we're in the middle of a massive extinction wave, and so we're losing a lot of biodiversity at the moment. And biodiversity is genetic diversity.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I didn't even really consider that right now. But yeah, wow, that is very scary to think about to me. But what's it called? So we're more concerned about more. We shouldn't probably be thinking or worry more about what CRISPR could, reduce that genetic diversity. More, we should be worried about climate change and sort of stuff that is also mostly affecting us right now.
Yeah, and I mean, habitat for all of this biodiversity, right? You know, I think we've destroyed a lot of the habitat. So, um, I think those are having at the moment much bigger impact, yeah, than CRISPR is.
So we should start more focusing on ourselves, more like climate change and fixing our environment rather than focusing on CRISPR and worrying
Well,
about that.
I mean, what some people have argued that CRISPR is part of how to fix the environment.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, if you think of CRISPR technologies used to genetically engineer microorganisms for renewable energy sources or stuff like that, or using it to genetically engineer organisms to break down pollutants,
Hmm.
um, those would be examples of how CRISPR would be part of the toolbox of addressing these massive environmental challenges that we face right now.
Hmm. So going back to it, so CRISPR, so we could probably use CRISPR in a more positive aspect than in a more negative aspect. Is what we're thinking.
I think that yeah, but it's of course based on the decisions the scientist makes and the politicians make. But yes, I think that CRISPR will have positive consequences.
Got you. One, was it called, question I do have too, which I think uh, for me, I'm 50-50 about this, but do you think CRISPR technology can lead to the revival of eugenic practices?
Yeah, I mean that's it. It seems very unlikely, but one could imagine that somebody might be crazy enough to say, "Oh, I want to eliminate these DNA sequences from my offspring's genome because they're not pure or whatever."
Yeah,
But
not considered
it
like
seems like
superior or something.
yeah, but it seems like that is I don't know. I don't think that's a big worry.
No?
I don't think it's a big worry that people will go that route. No. I mean, it's somewhat dangerous too, right? To genetically engineer a genome.
Hmm.
Like,
I,
how
I
do you know what the consequences are? Because I mean, you're moving new pieces of DNA into the genome, and it could be that that has unintended consequences somewhere else.
got you. Yeah, because I feel like certain things like going back to the question about risks too, with that, if like you said, when it comes to, whether that be for like genetics for looks or something, there's multiple genes for that.
Yeah.
So to change all those genes, there's definitely a big risk when it comes to you as the organism, so that is definitely very scary to think about too. But Yeah. No. So would you say this could lead to the revival of eugenic practices or no?
No,
No, you don't
no,
believe
I
that.
don't think so. I think
Gotcha.
there's plenty of eugenic practices out there already, but people are not going to use CRISPR to promote it. I don't think. No.
Gotcha. Do you think this could be what's it called? Do you think this could be used to eliminate genetic disabilities, or does that undermine the
Yeah.
value of people living with disabilities?
Oh, well, of course, a person with genetic disabilities opinion would be important here, and
Hmm.
I am not such. So, uh, but it seems like if I were the parent and I had, and and I realized one of my embryos had a genetic mutation that would cause a disability or more difficult life, maybe it wouldn't be more difficult. I don't know. Um, then I can see why, as a parent, you would use CRISPR technology to change that so that your offspring would not have to face those challenges.
Hmm. No, I agree. I think what's it called? I think it is definitely important for some of us that does not have what's it called a genetic disorder. They probably need to talk about this subject more often. But I look at certain things like cystic fibrosis or like certain things like that where it's definitely a little scary,
Yep.
or is it muscle atrophy?
Yep.
Yes, which like they can
Muscle
benefit
dystrophy.
for it,
Yep.
but also it could that can I feel like if you go in the practice of saying, hey, this is something that's like it's bad, which it is bad, but it is definitely like undermining the value of the person sometimes when it comes to that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. There's a range of opinions on it.
No, I agree. I think it's definitely because we want to benefit the most people, but when it comes to certain things, it's definitely hard to, what's it called, make those decisions because it's definitely like ruling out some people's voices.
Yep.
Yeah. I definitely want to jump back into some questions maybe about like what's it called? More societal stuff. How can CRISPR be used to improve crops without harming the environment or small farmers?
Um, well, I think the harming the small farmers part is probably an economic question. And I don't know how CRISPR, certainly I'm not an expert at that. So CRISPR could be used to genetically engineer crops. We already were able to genetically engineer crops, but
Hmm.
CRISPR is better at it. Um, and the kind of things that the genetic engineering of crops have been used for is things like pesticide resistance. So there's BT resistant corn is a classic example.
Hmm.
Um, Also, another one is herbicide resistant corn. So corn resistant to Roundup has been made
Gotcha.
in the large amounts. And that allows you to spray an herbicide on the field and kill all the weeds in the field, but your crop survives. Um, and that has increased yields as well. But some people feel it has caused the release of more pesticides. And so I think when we look at CRISPR, it probably is a case by case situation of what is being genetically altered and what could the consequences of that alteration be.
Gotcha. Do you think with the genetically modified like pesticides, do you think that would be more detrimental to the health of whether it be for foods or for people?
Um, well, so the two examples I gave of BT corn as well as Roundup resistant corn. For the first one, the worry was that the toxin that was produced by the plant, which made it resistant to insect damage, was also killing off butterflies,
Gotcha.
pollinators that were important for the ecosystem. And so that's a kind of damage. In the case of the Roundup, there were people that are arguing, yeah, no, we're spraying more Roundup because it's an easy way of controlling all these weeds. And then the Roundup gets in the waterway, perhaps, and so there's controversy about the safety of that as well.
Hmm. No, I think for me, do you think with CRISPR this can definitely be used to improve upon, whether that be for pesticides or for certain measures like that, or do you think it could create like more problems in the future?
I think both.
Mm.
Yeah.
So time will kind of tell, and definitely experiments, and you have to go through the tests and everything, and you have to, understand the risks and the what's it called?
No, I think some interventions are going to work out really well, and other ones not so great.
Hmm. Do you think the ones that are not going to work so great will, do you think that's going to like scare a lot of people when it comes to this treatment?
You mean using CRISPR to improve
Yes.
crops?
Yes.
Um, no, I don't think people seem to be very upset about it at the moment.
No. Do you think in the future, if they create maybe just say like a pesticide or something that could be used for this, that maybe damages most crops or kills most crops, or just say like ruins the soil or contributes to maybe some more ecosystem problems? Do you think more people would probably be afraid of genetically modified organisms?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think if the food supply of the country were negatively affected by these technologies, people would get very leery of the technology.
Hmm.
Yeah, but we haven't really seen that happen yet.
No.
Like I said, and CRISPR is not the first technology that allows genetic modification of organisms. We have been genetically modifying organisms for quite a while,
Hmm.
and on a
Well,
large scale, I think.
no, that does make sense. I think my worry also comes from the stem of I have a more maybe negative mind space to it just because
Huh?
it's a little scary for me just to comprehend, but I'm definitely kind of more understanding how I feel like it's more in the sense of more anxiety based stuff than actual real logical based stuff. But I do appreciate you for kind of breaking it
So
down and
what is your worry when you have these? Wait, what do you worry about?
I think for me, I think something like that with CRISPR, I mean, changing genetic information, and I mean, you could do so much with it. I think for me, I view our world as something that's always changing and always bettering. And the risk of having it be in the sense of like, may, altering people's genomes and altering people's just genetic information is a little scary if you're and you use in the wrong way, not for, diseases or certain things like that. But I believe that it could definitely be weaponized by certain people, like you said, politicians and certain things. And for me, I have a fear-based thing for that just because of how our political environment is now.
Hmm.
So it's definitely a little bit worrisome when it comes to anything because I mean, you can just say someone can alter food and it could make people sick or it could promote diseases and certain things like that, or it like creating weaponized soldiers, which is a little silly, and a little going too far,
I
but
don't know. Like, is it or is it not?
and that's the thing that's a little scary, for me personally. It's definitely daunting to think about how far we can go in the future about this. Because you can go so far into the thing. If you can say you can change this little thing, what can say that you can't change this whole aspect of it?
No, I think it's important to realize that there are no technological barriers to going really far with this technology, with altering genomes, including human genomes. Um, I think, however, there are going to be lots of social and ethical barriers.
Hmm. Do you think one of the biggest things, do you think in today's environment, do you think these things could pass without let's just say, hmm, do you think this will be like a more of a problem in just say like the next 50 years from now, or is this like something that can happen soon?
Um, well, when you say these things, what are
like
you?
all like all these maybe these like negative aspects of CRISPR, do you think this could definitely be in the moods of like having a discussion with scientists or political figures?
N- I don't think it's going to be a big issue, no, in the near future.
No.
I don't think it will dominate the headlines, but I think that slowly we'll get better and better and better at manipulating the genomes of organisms, including humans, and you will see more and more applications in which the technology. I mean, that the technology is not going to be out in the open, right? It'll be
Hmm.
it'll be a new cancer treatment drug, or it will be a new, agent to treat infectious diseases, or something like that, but that it has a CRISPR component to it.
Hmm.
Um, I think that will happen, but that's going to take quite a while too, I think. Um, and so we'll see that definitely happen over the next 20 or 30 years. But the idea of, I think, genetically engineered soldiers or anything like that, that's not happening over the next 50 years, I don't think.
No.
No.
Do you think that it could happen though?
Well, like I said, technology wise, I mean, there'd be lots of challenges because I think with soldiers, you probably want many of them, right? So,
Hmm.
like one successful genetic engineering
You kind of have like one
situation.
subject and kind of like copy paste.
Yeah, you would have to genetically engineer many embryos, and I mean, the genes that you would target seems really complicated. It seems really unlikely, really, that that's where it's going to go. And it seems like warfare also is going towards AI powered robots. So
Yeah, that's also a very scary thing to think about too.
why would you need, genetically engineered humans?
That is true.
But
I
I think that one's a long shot, and you should not worry about that one.
got you. And going through this interview, I've definitely gotten my what's it called? Learned a little bit more about CRISPR and definitely trying to have a more positive aspect for it, more leading in the traits of it's a more ethical ways of treating maybe diseases or preventing certain things rather than physical altercations or maybe genetically engineered soldiers, you know? So it's definitely very good that we're talking about this. I agree and I thank you.
Yep.
Going back to maybe throwing back to the questions rather than spiraling down the negative aspects, how do we define good and bad genes in the context of CRISPR?
Um,
And who gets to decide?
yeah, 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 yeah. So I don't think it's such a thing as a good or a bad gene. It's a gene encodes a sequence for a protein, and that protein then does things. And it probably depends on what your perspective is, if the thing that the protein does is good or bad.
Just a more
Um,
perspective-based thing.
yeah, very much
Gotcha.
so. Um, and like we have been talking about, many of these traits are polygenetic, so there are many, many genes involved, and it's not like one of them is bad and the other one is good. Um, and so it's much more that the traits are good or bad.
Hmm.
Um, and who gets to decide if a trait is good or bad? Well, it seems like through capitalism, it's the consumer that gets to decide what's good or bad.
Hmm.
Democracy, a voter supposedly gets to decide what's good or bad.
Gotcha. Do you think this will lead into the sense of more like these practices to say like if one scientist deems that this is a bad what's it called? This is like a bad gene or something like that, but someone's going to argue that this is actually fine, this is a good gene, or whether
Yeah.
this you should not discriminate against that, or maybe that group of people who have this gene. And do you think there's going to be like people in different countries that maybe alter this gene, and there's definitely going to be some that don't? Do you think there's going to be like a challenge when it comes to expressing that aspect of, hey, this is good, this is bad?
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily going to be consensus on that among all people across the earth. No.
So do you think there's going to be some practices that kind of like goes against the law and will maybe, what's it called, alter these genes?
Yeah, and I think we already had that happen, right? So right now, the European Union has much more strict laws against
Mm,
engineered organisms. The United States is more of a Wild West. But the first CRISPR genetically engineered embryos came out of China.
mm,
And, that did apparently violate some laws. I think the scientists went to jail for a while.
mm,
Um, and so yeah, different groups of people are going to have different opinions on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable and what kind of genetic modifications are reasonable. It's going to be a huge controversy and difference of opinion about that across the globe.
mm. I know I know this is a long shot question, but I was actually in class we were talking about genetically like made organs for humans. So
Yep.
they would inject like human stem cells into a animal, probably a pig, and change their genome, whether that be like a heart or a lung or a liver or kidney, something like that, and harvest that organ and use that. Do you think that is bad or is that good?
Um, well, I'm sure that if I had heart disease and I wanted a functional human heart, and that's the only one that I could get, I would be pleased to get it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I think right now we have an ethical situation where we eat pigs, right? So
Mm-hmm.
having a pig grow an organ for us seems ethically acceptable and morally acceptable in our society.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know there's a huge list, a huge wait for organ transplant. People can't get their hands on organs. I think that yes, it would be great to have pigs grow human organs for us. And one of the challenges was that the pig genome contained quite a few retroviral genomes,
Mm-hmm.
and these pig viruses could make us sick. But I think they have used CRISPR to remove many of those viral sequences from the pig's genome, um, so that it is possible to grow organs that are free of those viruses.
No, we were talking about it in class and it piqued my interest because there was a lot of questions thrown at it like after we harvest the organs, do you think that they could still sell the meat off as like as food, you know?
Yeah, the organ is so much more valuable than the food would be,
Hmm.
that I think that'd be relatively unimportant to the pharmaceutical company that was growing these organs in pigs.
Hmm. Yeah, what's it called? I think I was spiraling with that cut topic, which I had to talk about just because it's
Yeah.
definitely for me, I was going to so many like I don't know, I couldn't accept like certain things, or I was like, well, then what would we do with the body, or what would we do with this thing? What would there's so many things to go with it.
Yep.
Sorry to break out of the conversation.
Oh, no, that's totally fine.
It
No,
was
it's an
just
interesting
something that
conversation.
that definitely that piqued my interest and was like, huh, this is something we're doing. But yeah, that's basically all the questions I have for you today.
Oh, all right.
Again, Professor Schwartz, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate you sharing your insights today.
No
I
problem. Good luck
appreciate
with
it.
your podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And
Yep.
again, to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Editing Humanity. If this conversation got you thinking, share with a friend or leave us a comment. Let's keep asking questions, challenging ideas, and exploring because this allows us to help guide responsible innovation, protect human rights, and prevent misuse or exploitation. Until next time, thank you.